Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Tet. Shavua Tov to everyone. Today's daf is sponsored by Amy Goldstein in loving memory of her mother, Carolyn Barnett Goldstein, on her 6th yahrzeit. Mom, I missed your knowledge of music, art, and literature. You were gone way too soon. I'm also wishing a Purim Sameach to those who are still celebrating. Okay, and with that, we'll get started. So we're in the middle of this Mishnah where we were talking about that the only case we could find, according to Rabbi Yehuda, in this example that they brought, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yoshaya said basically we're going to only case we could find where you're adding to something the Zakeh Mamre is talking about, kind of taking a Torah commandment that would have worked in one way, but if you add to it, it ruins it. The only case is tefillin. It can't be the four species, the arbat haminim. It can't be tzitzit because all of those either from the beginning are already messed up, or you're not actually ruining it by just adding another based on whether kesher or eged is a mitzvah, is not a mitzvah. Okay, I'm not going to go back and go to all those details. But Gemara then asked from the beginning of our daf, Ihachi tefillin nami. But then tefillin are no different really than the arbaat haminim or than tzitzit in that way. Because the avid arba'a bate, if you make the arba'a batim, the four compartments, va'ite achrina ba'anach kabayim, and then you add a fifth, it doesn't mess it up. Again, you're not allowed to have five, and it's problem for adding the fifth. But the other four are still there and should be valid. And if you from the beginning you created five, well then garuva omitu, then it's already messed up from the beginning. And again, we have to find something that stood on its own first, and then you ruined it by adding. So they say no, because Rabbi Zera said, Bayit chitzon she'eno ro'eh ta'avir pasul. If the fourth compartment, okay, the one on the edge, doesn't see the air, meaning if it's not completely flush to the side of it, but there's something blocking it, meaning if you add a fifth, then the fourth one no longer sees the air, which meaning it's no longer on the edge. And if it's not on the edge, the tefillin are disqualified. So according to Rabbi Zera, that's how we would be able to explain the tefillin. Why the tefillin is the only case where this could actually happen. Okay, now we're going to move to the next Mishnah, which is going to confuse us a little bit. We'll see in a minute why. In mimitinoto lo bebeitin shebi'iro. Now I want to remind you, there's a kemamre goes to the main court. Remember, it has to happen in the court that's in the Sanhedrin that sits in the Lishkat HaGazit. Then the Zakeh Mamre goes back and teaches in his own city and does a hora'ah, right? A teaching and either he does or the other people do like his ruling against the court. Then he gets killed. But they don't kill him in the local court in his city. And lo bebeitin should be Yavne. And if the court, the Sanhedrin already moved to Yavne, which remember in the end of the Second Temple time period, the Sanhedrin already moved, you can't kill there. Ela ma'alino to lebeitin hagadol shebYerushalayim. You have to bring him back to the court in Jerusalem. Now, here's what's confusing. If the Sanhedrin's already moved to Yavne, then there is no court in the Beit HaMikdash. So it's very confusing what reality they're talking about. So I'm going to leave it as an open question, okay? But something's a little confusing about this Mishnah. But it could be saying if the Beit Din's already in Yavne, we can't kill him, and the only way to do it is when there's Lishkat HaGazit in the Beit Din Agadol sits in the Lishkat HaGazit in the temple. They're the only ones who could kill them. But now we're going to see another thing that seems to contradict a well-known halacha, which is not only do you bring him to the Beit Din Agadol Sheb'Yerushalayim, but mishamrino to ad haregel. We wait until the next of the three regalim. Okay, we wait until Pesach, Shavuot, or Sukkot, whichever one is next. Umimitino to baregel, and we wait to then, and we kill him then. Why? Now, what does this halacha go against, by the way? What happened to Inui Hadin? You have to kill the person immediately, right? We don't torture people by pushing off their death. Okay, so this is very strange, but it's because there's some other pasuk, shenemal, b'chol ha'am yishma'u v'yira'u v'lo yizidun od. It says, but there's Zakeh Mamre, we need to have a public display of the death so that everybody hears, and yira'u means, and they fear first, right? They fear, v'lo yizidun od, and they will not do this again. Okay, we have to make a public spectacle of this. That's Divrei Rabbi Akiva. So we wait. When can you get the whole nation together? On the regalim, when everybody comes to the temple. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Emani Dino Shalzet. What do you mean? Rabbi Yehuda says you can't push off. That's torturing someone. You have to kill them immediately. So how do you fulfill v'chol ha'am yishma'u v'yirau? Ela mimitin oto miyad. V'kotvim v'sholchin shluchim b'chol ha'mekamot. Sounds like the Megillah, right? They send letters around to everybody. Okay, ish ploni mitchayev mitab beit din, and they basically say the following person was killed because it was a zaken mamre, and that's the way we publicize it. Okay, we're going to see in the Braita a further proof of Rabbi Yehuda why he thinks that his way is better. Or is okay, so Tanu Rabbanan. So now we're going to bring a Braita, which basically is going to say the same thing as the Mishnah with one minor addition. And mimitinoto lo bebeitin should be rov, lo bebeitin should be yavne, elamalinoto lo beitin hagadol should be Yerushalayim, ushamrinoto ad regel, mimitimoto beregel, shneimar b'chol ha'am yishmu v'yirau, divrei Rabbi Akiva. Okay, that's just Rabbi Akiva word for word, like we saw in the Mishnah, which is you can't kill him in the city, you can't kill him in the Sanhedrin if it moved to Yavne, or obviously anywhere else it moved to. The only place you could kill would be in the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, and you wait for the next holiday in order to make a public spectacle. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda. Now here it says Rabbi Yehuda reacts directly to him and says, "V'chine amar yiru v'yirau." It doesn't say that everybody has to see it and they will fear, but halolon amar ela yishmeu v'yirau. They will hear. Now hearing you could do by not seeing, right? You don't need to see it. Okay. Now here's a good proof for what he's saying. V'lama manim dino shel zed. There's no reason, right? We have two issues going. Right. We have number one. We have a halacha about inoy adin. You're not allowed to push off the death of someone. And in addition, it doesn't ever say they all have to see. It just says they all have to hear. So hearing you could do by writing letters. Okay, and that's his resolution. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we bring another Braita to show that there's 4 people in the Torah that this is said by. They need arba'at tzrachim hachrazah. The following 4 people need a big announcement about what's going on here. Hamesit, it's about killing someone so that everybody sees and learns a lesson. Hamesit, the one who tries to sway people to worship idols, which we've already seen is very severe in all sorts of ways, and this is another way. Uben sorer moreh, son, a rebellious son, which we said never really happened, so they wouldn't have to do this, but theoretically, if it were to happen, you would have to publicize it. V'zakei mamrei, our case, and edim zomimi, false witnesses. B'kulu ktibhu, by all of them, it says either v'chol ha'am, the whole nation, or chol Yisrael, or all the Jews, which is basically the same thing. But be'edim zomimim ktiv v'hanisharim, and those who are the remainder of the people. So why does it use a different language? Because not everybody can be a witness. Okay, first of all, take off 50% of the population. Women can't be witnesses. Take off anyone who's a psul. Remember, there's robbers and gamblers and all these other people who can't testify. So you don't need everyone to see because it's not a relevant halakha to everyone. Which begs the question, what about a zakei mamre? Forget about, can't be women, can't be all those people, can't be, right? Unless you're a teacher, right, who's in a leadership position, it's very limited. But zakei mamre has something else going on. And here, as we finish the zakei mamre topic, it's good to review, which is that zakei mamre is really not about, we're worried that some other zaken is going to get up and do this. What are we worried about? We're worried about the breakdown of the whole structure of the passing on of our tradition, which goes through the court, not through God, right? God is no longer present in a way that he can give us prophecy. Maybe it's the lead into the prophecy topic, which we're going to talk about right now. But in the time of prophecy, maybe there was this connection to getting the truth from God, but we no longer have that. Lo b'shamayim hi. And if we start having people disrespect the court, it's going to have a breakdown of our whole system of the passing down of our tradition. And that's why this is such important halacha for everyone to see, because it, again, highlights, again, if we go back to Kadesh L'Ribu Machlokot Yisrael, which is, it highlights this idea that we don't want to have just debates about who's got the final word of authority, because that will cause a breakdown in the belief of the people in the system of the court system, which of course makes mistakes, but we have to have a belief in the system that the system works. Otherwise, we're going to have a major problem with the passing down of our traditions. So that's why the edim, on the one hand, aren't relevant for everybody, but the zakei mamre is relevant for everybody, even though not everyone can become a zakei mamre. Okay, next topic. And from here, we're going to get into a little bit of a Shiur in Tanach for some of this. Navi HaShekel. Okay, now we're going to get into the way we're going to structure it. Was going to have a Mishnah. We're going to have a Braita that's kind of like the Mishnah, just organized it a teeny drop different. And then we're going to get to what's the source. Okay, we're going to have 6 cases in the end. 3, I'll already tell you, 3 that are going to be killed by the court, chenek, strangulation, which is why they're in our Mishnah, and 3 that get killed bidei shamayim, by the hands of God. Okay, and they all have to do somehow with prophecy. And then we're going to get to the source for them in the Torah, how we know that those 3 get killed by strangulation and those 3 get killed by in the hands of God. And then we're going to get to cases that actually happen of all of these 6 cases. Okay, that's going to be the main structure. And then we'll get off on a bit of a side tangent into the Akedah and some very famous midrashim on Akedat Yitzchak. And from there, we'll finish up with one small topic. Okay, Navi HaSheker. So a Navi Sheker, there's 2 kinds here. Mitnabe Mashalo Shama. It's a false prophet who basically makes up a prophecy and says, oh yeah, I saw that, I heard this prophecy. Okay, never heard it. Or Mashalona and Marlo. Or says something that was said to somebody else, not to him. Okay, so we have a prophet who prophesizes a prophecy that was told to somebody else. Mitato bidadam. So now we only have 2, so we're going to get to the 3rd. But before we get to the 3rd, we're going to go off on people who get killed by the hands of God. Aval kovesh nivuato, like Yonah, someone who doesn't want to give his prophecy over. V'hamavater al divrei navi, and someone here it's not a prophet; it's a person who doesn't listen to a prophet who tells him go do something or tells her go do this. V'navi shabar al divrei atzmo, and a navi who doesn't do what they themselves prophesized about. Mitato bidei shamayim. Those 3 get killed by the hands of God. Shene'emal, anochi adrosh me'imo. That's the pasuk we're going to see. Okay, that pasuk actually says really only 1 case, but we're going to somehow learn from their 3 cases. Okay, that pasuk. Let's just read it right now. It's pasuk and save. These are all, by the way, in chapter 18 of Dvarim, where it talks about the false prophets. V'haya ish asher lo yishma el dvarai asher yidaber b'shmi. This sounds like a person who doesn't do what I sent a prophet to tell him to do. Okay, so that sounds like the middle case. Person who doesn't listen to what a prophet says the person should do. Anochi adrosh me'imo. Now that's God saying, I will demand this person. Haminabeh b'shem avodah zarah. Now we get back to another case which you get killed by the hands of man, okay, in strangulation. Haminabeh b'shem avodah zarah. If you prophesize in the name of an idol, and you say, the idol told me, blah, blah, blah. The idol told me this. Even if you say, the idol told me that you have to keep the following mitzvah. Okay? Like, if you said, the prophet told me that this item is impure, and it was impure, and it was true. But if you said, the idol told me, it's a problem, and you'll get chenek. Habal eshet ish. Now we get to a few other cases where you get chenek. Okay, we're done with the prophets for right now in the Mishnah, although our hold off is going to be about prophets, really, almost. Habal eshet ish, someone who sleeps with a married woman, right? We know this already. You get chenek. We've seen this many times. Kevan shenechnesa l'reshut habal l'nisuin afa pisha lo nivala haba aleha reza bechenek. Okay, so if she once went, at what point is habal eshet ish going to get chenek? As soon as she goes into the domain of the husband, even if, right, like to get married, even if she's not yet married, and even if they haven't consummated the marriage yet. Now, what this is basically saying is there's nara murasa where you get skila when she's betrothed. Now, assuming she's still a nara, the stage at which she'll turn into a chenek is once basically the father gives her over to the messengers of the husband, even, okay, to get married. And we saw that already in the Mishnah about the nara murasa. Obviously, if she's not, okay, what's interesting is the Mishnah doesn't relate to what if she's not a Nara, let's she's a Bogeret Arusa. Then the laws of Nara Murasa would not be relevant, and then this Eshet Ish Chenek would be relevant already from the time of the betrothal. But they don't mention that for whatever reason. Zomimei Bat Kohenu Boala. Okay, the Zomimim of a Bat Kohen and the person she had relations with, we've seen this a bunch of times already. Remember, this is an exception to the rule because they basically testified about a woman that she's supposed to get burning and the man that he's supposed to get chenek. And theoretically, if 2 death penalties should be upon you, you're going to get the more severe one. But in this case, not, because it says kasher zamam lasol lachiv, to your brother, not to your sister. Since there's a man and a woman here, 2 different punishments of what they were trying to get done. It's only what they tried to do to the man, not the woman. And this, by the way, I just want to point out, we're at the end of the 10th chapter. We're going to go tomorrow. We're going to start the 11th chapter, Parak Chelek, which in the Mishnah is actually the 10th parak, and in the Yerushalmi also appears as the 10th parak. This is really the 11th parak, and it's really the lead-in, this Mishnah, to Masechet Mako, where we're going to talk about Zomimim and Edim Zomimim. So it's really the connector between the two Masechtot. Okay. Why it switched and all that, that's a whole other thing. But for whatever reason, in the Gemara, it switched. Probably they wanted to put Perek Chelek as its own separate thing because you're going to see it's a totally different type of chapter, totally different content, and it's really going to be all kind of Agadata, an entire Perek of Agadata. Very long dapim, you should be warned, but not the same legal stuff that we've been doing the whole Masechet. So as a way to kind of have it stand alone, I guess they moved it to the end. Okay, Tanu Rabbanit. Now we get to the Braita. So we're going to go back and, like I said, mainly deal with the Nevi'im. The Braita organized a lot better. It's, by the way, usually they use this as a mnemonic, right? Imagine you're going to the store and you're too lazy to write your list down, so you at least remember I need 3 items, right? Or 3 items in the milk department, 3 items in the meat department, or something like that. Use this as a way to remember. Braita in general, they use mnemonics. So they say, there's 3 that are mitatam b'dei adam. 3 that are mitatam b'dei shamayim, as opposed to the Mishnah that organized it 2 and then separated the other one, right? They did 2, then 3, and then they went back to the other one. So the Braita organized it a little bit better. 3 b'dei adam, 3 b'dei shamayim. Now it's just a review. Okay, so we can go through them again. Someone who prophesizes something they never heard, or something that wasn't said to them, or or they prophesize in the name of idols. Mitatam b'dei adam. Those will all get strangulation. If you hold back your prophecy and don't tell it, you don't listen to what a prophet tells you to do, and a prophet who doesn't do what the prophet was told to do, God will punish you. Now, as I told you before, we're going to get to what's the source in the Torah for these 3 things, and those 3 things. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Amar Kra. Okay, I'm going to read you first this whole pasuk. Achanavi asher yazid ledaver davar bishmi. That's going to be someone who intentionally says something in God's name that God never said, right? Asher lo tzivitiv, that I didn't command him. Va'asher yidaber b'shem Elohim achirim, or will say in the name of an idol. Okay, umeta naviyahu, and that navi will die. It doesn't say how they'll die, but we know that any mita stam, we assume it's chenek, because that's the least. Okay, we've learned that before. So now let's go through. That's someone, right, who says something in the name of God that you didn't hear. Asher lo tzivitiv, that I didn't command him. What does it sound like? Ha lechavero tzivitiv. But it sounds like, right, that adds the second case. I didn't command him, but I commanded someone else. And that's the one who says someone that his friend heard. And that, right, that's the one who says something that wasn't said to him, but was said to somebody else. Okay, that's case number 3. Obviously, same thing. Uchtiv, and when it just says umeit, it doesn't say what kind of death, it means chenek, strangulation. Now we're going to have to figure out how we're going to get. Now we have that pasuk anochi adrosh meimo, and it said someone asher lo yishma el devarai asher yidaber b'shmi. Right. So now that sounds like someone who doesn't listen to a prophet. How are we going to get to all the other 2 cases? So how do we know they get killed by the hands of God? Okay, now asher lo yishma, again, that's the middle case. A person who doesn't follow what a prophet tells him or her. Karibe, but you can read that word yishma, you can read it with different vowels. You can read it as lo yashmiya. Lo yashmiya is doesn't tell his or her prophecy. That's kovesh et nevuato. That's case 1. The karibe lo yishama el devarai. Lo yishama means they don't listen to their own words, what they said, and that's case number 3. And it's at the end of that pasuk says anochi adrosh meimo bidei shamayim. If we compare these 2 psukim, I just want to point out the first pasuk had 3 different things in it. So we darshan 3 different things from, right, 3 different sets of words there. Even though it really looked like 2, but we were able to split the first 2 and kind of make it into 2. And there we got to 3. In the second one, it's one word, lo yishama or lo yishma. And then we changed lo yishma to lo yishmiya and lo yishama, and then we got to 3. Now we're going to start with our examples. Okay, here we're going to get off, and I'm going to read you a bit of Divrei HaYamim. Chronicles 2, book 2, chapter 18. Okay, I'm not going to really read too much inside, but I'm going to paraphrase, because otherwise we'll never finish the daf. Yehoshaphat was the king of Yehuda. At the same time, Achav was the king of Israel, and Yehoshaphat marries. Okay, we have this marriage going on between the two kingdoms. He marries into Achav's family. If you remember, Achav was pretty bad. Going back historically, we have the story of Kerem Navot, if you remember, which is Izebel basically got Izebel. Okay, let's start from the beginning. Achav wanted the Kerem of Navot. He really wanted this vineyard, and Izebel basically arranged that she brought false witnesses to claim that he was a Moreh b'malchut. He committed treason, and they get him killed so that Achav could have his vineyard. Okay, that's one story that's going to be relevant. And another story, by the way, was in the Haftarah yesterday, which was the story of the Nevi'ei Habal, which is they had all these prophets that worshipped idols, and then there was a big showdown with Eliyahu at Har Carmel when basically the Haftarah ended yesterday with the words Hashem Elokim, and basically Eliyahu does a big showdown, and they all bring their sacrifices, and he puts water around, and fire comes up and takes his sacrifice, which, by the way, we're going to get to at the end of today's stuff, that story. And there, what happened was he had them bring sacrifices outside the temple, which is really in theory forbidden, but he was allowed to do that because of the uniqueness of the situation, and we'll get back to that. But anyway, what happens is Yehoshaphat and Achav marry. There's a marriage between the two families, and Achav says, "Come out to war with me." Okay, and Yehoshaphat says, "Well, bring me a prophet." To say that it's okay. Like, let's check with God first, but I'm happy to go with you. Just let's check with God before we go to war. Everything's okay. So he brings all these prophets, 400 prophets, and they all say, go, and, you're going to win the war. And then Yehoshaphat says, what, they're not really a Navi here? Okay, now we don't know why he figures that out, but we'll see that later in the Gemara today. And so Achav says, well, there is this one Navi, Michayahu ben Yimla, but he hates me, and he always says bad things about me. I wonder why. And basically, they go to get him. But before he comes into the scene, Tzidkiyahu ben Kenana, which we're going to read about in 1 second, brings, he comes and he brings these horns that are made of iron. And he says, Be'ela tinagachat Aram, that's who they were going to fight. He says, go and attack Aram with these horns because you're going to win the war. Then Michayahu comes, and first he's a little sarcastic, and he says, oh, go, if you want to go, go. But he also says, by the way, I'm only going to tell the truth, whatever God tells me. But then he says, go, like, okay, you want to go, go. Like, what do you want from me? And then he prophesizes, and he says basically that Achav's going to die, okay? And then obviously Achav's very angry. He says, told you he's only going to say bad things about me. Okay, but before he says his whole thing, okay, 1 second, he says... No, he already says it. Okay, he doesn't exactly say Achav's going to die. He says it in a different poetic kind of way, but people are going to be like sheep without their shepherd and all that. Okay, but then when Achav says, "I know you're just speaking like I knew you were going to say bad things about me," Michayahu goes into a whole description. Okay, and I'm going to read this inside because we're going to darshan these psukim also soon. Vayomer lachem shim'u dvar Hashem. He says, "I want you to hear the word of God." He says, "Listen. What I saw in my prophecy was I saw God sitting on his chair and all the hosts are around him. And God said, who is going to seduce Achav to die? And this one says, let's do it this way. And that one says it that way. And then a ruach comes, a spirit, okay, which we'll see. We're going to darshan that soon. And comes before God and says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to seduce Achav. And God says, with what? And he says, I'm going to be a false prophecy in the mouths of all these prophets. And basically that ruach came down, gave this prophecy to all these 400 prophets, and that's why they did it. And basically, God gives him his blessing and says, "Go for it, okay? Go do that." And then, okay, that's basically what we need for right now. Okay, now, the rest of it is not so important. I mean, it's important for the text, but well, like I said, we'll get stuck in that chapter forever. So let's go now. So who's a prophet that said something they didn't hear? Kegon Tzidkiyahu ben Kenana, exactly the Tzidkiyahu I was just mentioning. Dachtiv Vayaso Tzidkiyahu ben Kenana, Karnei Barcel. Okay, he made these iron horns, and then he said, Be'ela tinagach daram. To which the Gemara asks, I understand, he died because of his false prophecy? Remember, I mean, Abeba Shalosh Shama, right, gets killed by the court. I mean, in this case, it wasn't a court. We don't know if there was a court that killed him, but that was a good example of someone who says something who should have gotten killed in court. So they say, that's a bad example. What should he have done? Remember the story. Ruach navot at ite. Okay, remember I mentioned navot? So we're now going to darshan soon that the ruach that seduced them all to basically, that gave them this false prophecy was the Ruach of Navot, who was obviously exacting revenge on Achav for killing him. Now, how do we know this? Right? Who's going to get Achav to go to Ramot Gilad and die there? So now we're going to say, so God says, go for it, and you will succeed. Go out and do it. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda might say, means go out from my abode, right, where God was. My ruach, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ruchosh navot Israeli. Okay, so they say the ruach that went was, but they're basically saying it wasn't Tzidkiyahu's fault. He got a prophecy. It was the ruach of Navot that caused the whole thing to happen. How can we blame him? They say, you should have realized, like Rabbi Yitzchak said, you could have a bunch of prophets that prophesize in a similar type of way. But no two prophets ever say the same words. Now, here there were 400, before Tzidkiyahu came out, there were 400 prophets saying the exact same words. And according to Rabbi Yitzchak, that's proof that they're all lying. So he should have known that. To which the Gemara is, right? And now, here's a proof that two prophets who basically were prophesizing about Edom and the destruction of Edom. They both said it, but they said it in different words. Ovadiah and Yirmiyahu. Ovadiah said, Zadon libcha yishiecha. Yirmiyahu amar tiflat tzedekah yishiotcha zadon libecha. Okay, you see, it's similar words, but they're saying it differently. Okay, I'm not going to spend our time translating them. I want to get to our main things for today. But that proves two prophets don't prophesize in the same way. And Tzidkiyahu should have known that because Rabbi Yitzchak said. Now, obviously, Rabbi Yitzchak is many generations after Tzidkiyahu, to which the Gemara says, so now the Gemara continues and says, okay, so Tzidkiyahu should have known because he should have seen the 400 people saying the exact same words. He should have known they weren't saying anything real, and therefore he shouldn't have taken those horns and said what he said. Maybe he didn't know the halacha of Rabbi Yitzchak, right? Stands to reason. Well, it said, Well, Yehoshaphat already said so, because remember, after the 400 people, before Tzidkiyahu came up, Yehoshaphat said, isn't there a real prophet here, right? I want a real prophet. And obviously, Yehoshaphat knew the halacha, is what the Gemara is going to say. Isn't there a real, right? There's 400 people prophesying, and he says, they're not a Navi for God. Now there, Midrash likes to elaborate and say there was a bigger conversation going on here. Achav said to him, what about all these people? To which he answered, this is the tradition I have from my father's family. And then they basically put the halacha of Rabbi Yitzchak in the bow of Yehoshaphat. And basically what they're saying is, even if Tzidkiyahu didn't know, he should have realized when Yehoshaphat said, is there not a Navi to God here, that they were all false prophets. So he was to blame. Okay, next story. Okay, who's this? Okay, Yirmiyahu was in the Shuk HaElyon and said the following. Just to put us in a historical context, we've now moved forward. End of Bayit Sheni, we're in the reign of Tzidkiyahu. He was the last king. And Yirmiyahu says the following prophecy. If you remember, Yirmiyahu is basically saying, everything's going to be bad. You will come back, right? There's going to be destruction. The temple's going to be destroyed. You're going to be exiled. You will come back, but many years later, right? And now, he also prophesizes, though, the destruction of Elam, which is a nation that we're going to see in a minute, helped Babylonia, okay, in the destruction of the Jews. So, okay, now here we're going to have, it's not exactly someone prophesizing something that someone else heard, but it's prophesizing a kavachomer from what Yirmiyahu said. He took Yirmiyahu's prophecy, came up with a kavachomer, and then said it. Okay, what did Hananiah say? Ma'elam shelo ba'el elazor Bavel. They were only assisting Babylonia. And Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, shover et keshet elam, and I'm going to break their strength. Kasdim atzmam, the Babylonians themselves, al achakama v'kama, all the more so. So what did he do? He stood in the bottom area of the shuk, the lower area. Amar Kamar Shem Shavarti Ol Melech Bavel. Now, in that story, he basically says, I'm going to break the Babylonians. And then he says, and in 2 years, now he's a few years after Yirmiyahu said this prophecy, even though in the book, Yirmiyahu comes later than this, but in terms of, it says in each prophecy what year it was of Tzidkiyahu's reign, and this prophecy happened after. And Hananiah basically says, and in 2 years, all the people I sent to Babylonia are going to come back. And he basically says, right, there's not going to be a destruction. And it was obviously a false prophecy, and he ends up getting killed. Okay, Yirmiyahu says you're going to die for this. Anyway, okay, so now Amalei Rav Papa Labai. But wait, this isn't a prophecy that somebody said and he said it instead of that person. It was never said, right? He did a kavachomer from Yirmiyahu. So Amalei, so Abai answers him, no, since Yirmiyahu could have made the kavachomer himself and could have actually said it. Okay, he could have. So therefore, it was as if it was said to Yirmiyahu, and therefore, who knew to lo ne'amarlo, and therefore he said something that wasn't really said to him. Who's mitnabeh b'shem avodas hara? Let's go back to the Nevi'ei Habal that we were discussing with the whole Eliyahu and Har Carmel. Kegon Nevi'ei Habal, those are the people who were prophesizing in the name of the Baal, which was the avodah zarah at the time, right? It was one of the avodah zaras. HaKovesh et nivuato kegon Yonah ben Amittai, okay, the famous Jonah, who doesn't listen to God and doesn't tell the prophecy that God wants him to say about Nineveh. HaMivater al divrei Navi. This is someone who doesn't listen to what a Navi says. Kegon, turning out Amubet. Havrei de Micha. Okay, Micha, this is the same Michayahu ben Yimla that we saw before. We'll see a story, Dechtiv, ve'ish echad mibnei nevi'im amar re'eu. Okay, there were all these, in the Sefer Melachim, there's all these stories of prophets and the Elisha and Eliyahu stories in general. There's all the prophets, and there's a person from the Bnei Nevi'im, Amar Re'eu b'dvar Hashem, akenina. He said, in the name of God, right, God told me that you have to hit me. The man refused to hit him. And he said, well, since you didn't listen, and then the continuation of that pasuk is, the kecha aryeh, okay, the lion is going to attack you. And in fact, he left him and the lion came and attacked him and killed him. So there you have a quick, short story of someone who didn't listen to what a prophet said and he was killed. Navi shavar divrei atzmo. Okay, we're trying to finish up this list. Navi that doesn't do, this is the last one in the list, doesn't do what he himself said. This is famous, I always love the story. It's a crazy story. Kigon Ido Hanafi. Okay, Malachim Aleph, chapter 13. There's a story of this Ish Elohim that comes and he prophesies about Yeravam. And there's this, what happens is he was told by God, you're going to go there, you're going to prophesize. And then it says, Kikin Sivauti, God commanded me. Now what happens? He's not allowed to, God told him, don't go back. Lo tochal lechem. Okay, don't eat bread. Lo tishte mayim. V'lo tashu b'derech asher alachta. You're supposed to go there, and then you're supposed to come home. You're not supposed to stop on the way. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Right? Don't go back the same way you came. Okay, that's what he's told. Now, when he's done prophesizing, he meets this other Navi. Uchtiv vayomer lo gamani Navi kamoch. He says, oh, right. The guy tries to invite him home, and he says, I can't. God told me. He says, oh, I'm a prophet just like you, and God told me you can eat with me, and you can this, and he does. And he also gets killed by a lion. Okay, he gets killed by the hands of God. Okay, now we have some questions. So first we bring a braita. Tane Tanach Kamed Rav Chisda. Hakovesh et nivuato loke. Okay, we saw before if you don't do your prophecy, you get killed by the hands of God. But here it said in a braita, you also get lashes in the hands of a court. So Amarle. Manda achel. Now, this is a hard sentence to explain because without living in their time and understanding the linguistic, this is like a quip people would say, but it's hard to understand exactly what it means. Manda achel tamari ba'ar b'lalake. Someone who eats dates in a sieve is going to get lashes. Okay, now, what's the problem? Well, matrebe, who's going to warn him? Someone's eating dates in a sieve. It doesn't look like he's doing anything wrong. Now, some people think it's because there's worms in there and they can't see that there's worms, so they're not going to be able to warn him. Unclear exactly what this means. But the point, what they're saying is, if you're a prophet and you get a prophecy and you don't say it, how can you get punished by lashes in court? How does anybody know that you got a prophecy? Only you know you got a prophecy. So it's the same thing about the dates and the sieve. Nobody knows you're doing anything wrong. They're not going to warn you. So same thing here. Who could possibly warn you? How would they know? So Amar Abai Chavrei Nevi'eh. His friends who were prophets, they know. Minayade, how do they know that he got that you got a prophecy? Amar Abai Dechtib Ki lo yaseh Hashem Elokim Davar Ki im gilas sodom. God never says anything, right? Reveals anything unless he reveals his secret. Meaning, it's possible. Like let's take Jonah. Okay, Jonah doesn't give his prophecy over, but other people knew that he had this prophecy to give. Now it wasn't theirs to give, so but somehow they saw in Revelation. They got a revelation that there was a prophet who was supposed to prophesize, and that's how they were born. Okay? Vidil Mahadrube, but wait. let's take Yonah as a good example. What did Yonah say, right? Right? 40 days he was supposed to tell them, and Nineveh will be overturned. So maybe God changed his mind about it, which in fact, in that case, he did. Okay. So if God changes his mind, sometimes God says, I'm going to bring bad things and then changes his mind. So how can you punish this prophet? How do you know? You might know, the prophets might know that God gave this prophecy to someone, but maybe God changed his mind from the prophecy. So the answer, obviously, do you have a modul? If God changes God's mind, God will let all the prophets know who he let know in the first place. But wait, Yonah was supposed to prophesize. And in the end, what happens, right? They do tshuva. I mean, he does prophesize, they do tshuva, and then the nevuah is taken back. But you never see in the story that God tells Jonah, oh, it's not going to come true. So they say, Yonah mi'ikara nimve nehepechet amrule. Iulo yada ila tova ila ra'a. So now they say, wait, the prophecy did come true. Because what did Jonah say? In 40 days, Nineveh will be overturned. Overturned could be overturned for the good, overturned for the bad. So originally it meant overturned for the bad, but then it could be explained as overturned for the good. So in fact, it did come true because they flipped their behavior and everything was overturned. So that's not a good example of, that they weren't told. So in the end, we have an explanation for how the Navi could be warned because other Nevi'im must know about it as well. Hamivatir al divrei Navi, another question. If you don't do what a prophet said, minayada di'anish. Now, let's say a prophet comes to you and says, I'm a prophet, I got a prophecy from God, you're right, like the one we saw, where he said, you have to hit me. And he didn't hit him and he got killed. But how does he know the guy was telling the truth? Maybe the prophet was a liar. Maybe it was a false prophet. So you could explain, diyav le'ot. Maybe he gave him a sign. V'ham micha de lo yav le'ot v'yanish. But in that case that we saw with Micha, the friends of Michayahu, he didn't give him any sort of sign and he was killed. So, Hecha de Muchzak Shani. It was a person who was known to be a true prophet. Once you're known to be a true prophet, and this is going to take us off on a big tangent, people who are known to be prophets and already have a good track record, that will be a case where you're going to get killed if you don't do what they tell you. Okay? Because if we don't say this, Abraham Bahar Moriah Yitzchak. How did Yitzchak agree to be bound in the Akedah, if not the fact that Avram had a good track record already and was proven to be a prophet? Now, this, by the way, there's always a big debate about in all the Yitzchak midrashim about the Akedah, whether Yitzchak is the hero or Avram is the hero, and whether Yitzchak was old enough to really understand and be a part of it, or really he wasn't. This obviously shows he was a willing partner, right? And he was part of the whole Nisayam because he actually agreed also. Okay, where some people think that he was young and didn't agree and didn't have anything to do with it. It was all Avraham. So anyway, we're going to go back to that soon also, because we're going to get off, like I told you, on the Akedah. So now basically that's a good example. And Eliyahu Bahar Carmel that I told you we come back to from the Haftarah yesterday. He told the people to bring sacrifices. Now, how could they bring sacrifices if you weren't allowed to bring sacrifices outside the temple? But Eliyahu had a good track record. Everybody knew he was a real prophet. So because of that. Right? So that proves once you're proven to be a Navi, that's when this could take place. Only in that case, otherwise you won't get killed because you won't really know is the prophet true or not. Not a true prophet. Okay, now we're going to have two drashot to this one pasuk. Okay, it was after the following things that happened that God tested Abraham. So what words? Okay, dvarim is often words. What words happened before? Acharmai. So option number one. Am Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yossi ben Zimra. Here come very famous midrashim on the Akedah. Achar dvarav shel Satan. Okay, the Satan must have been involved here. Okay, this is basically taking the Eov story, copying it to the Avram story, and saying just like there was a Satan who came, and there it appears on the Psukim, must have been here as well. So it's after the words of the Satan, God decides to test Avram. Dichtiv. Vayigdal HaMelech Hayela v'yigamal. Right, this is just before where Yitzchak came of age, and what happened? They made a party. So comes the Satan and says this really matches the Eov, right? There was a big party, and then the Satan complains. Also, here Amar Satan l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ribono shel Olam. Zaken zechan anto l'mea shana pri bata, right? He's been waiting for 100 years for a child. He didn't sacrifice anything to you, not even a bird. Amar lo, klum asa ela b'shvil b'no. God says he did this all for his son. Im omer lo, zavachet bincha lefanai. If I say, sacrifice your son, miyad zovcho. So basically, according to this, Satan seduced God to do this. Miyad, immediately, Elohim nisad Avraham. Okay, and that's what the words were. Now we're going to continue a little bit in the psukim before we get back to option 2. Vayomer, kach ne bincha. Amar, right? So here's a you're dashing a few things in this pasuk. Kach na is please. Why did God have to say please? And not just because God is polite, but please is usually a word of begging. Okay, and then we're going to say it binchai, kepitcha, asher ahavta et Yitzchak, right? Your one and only, right? Sorry, your son, who's yachid, who's singular or one and only, asher ahavta that you love et Yitzchak. So why do you say it so long? So ein na ela lashon bakasha. So why bakasha? Why do you have to beg him? Mashal melech basar v'dam shamdu alav melchamot rabeh. It's a bit of it's not a perfectly parallel parable, but we'll go with it. Was a king who had a lot of wars. V'hayalo gibor echad v'nitzchan. Every time he had this one warrior who won all the wars. Liyamim amdala melchama chazaka. Then later, a really strong war came, really heavy war. Amar lo b'vakasha mimcha amod b'melchama zo. So the king says to his warrior, please do this. Otherwise, people will say, "Oh, the first ones he was able to get through because it was easy, but this one, no." So God says to Abraham, you went through all these nisyonot, you stood up to all these tests. But now I'm going to give you the real hard one comes up, and that's the one you really need to stand up for. Otherwise, people will say, "Oh, the earlier ones really weren't much of anything." And that's why you had to plead with him. So, right, when you say your son, he says, "What do you mean? I have two sons. Which one?" The single one, well, each of them are the only sons for their mother. Asher ahavta, that you love, I love them both. Et Yitzchak, okay, then finally Yitzchak. Why do you have to be so long-winded? Shaloti taref dato alav. They didn't want him to go into shock immediately. They wanted to soften the blow, as we say. Kedamos Satan laderech. Now, what happens? So the Satan gets, right, so Avram goes to take Yitzchak, and then the Satan says, oh, this isn't good. He's doing what I didn't want him to do. So the Satan now appears to Avraham on the way. Amar lo, hanisa davar elecha tileh, hine asarta rabim v'yadayim rafot techazeh, koshel kemu milecha ki ata tavo elecha vatele. So basically, he says to Avram, is it fair? Okay, I'm going to read Rashi. Is it appropriate that God should do this to you? It's God wants to weaken you and take away your child that you just, begged him for. Is that appropriate? And then basically the psukim, you've done all these amazing things. You strengthened all these people. You brought them to God. Is it make any sense that this is what God's going to do to you? Amar lo, ani b'tumielech. Avram says, I'm going. I'm going with what God said. Leave me alone. Amar lo hayo yiratcha kislatecha. He says to him, your fear of God is going to be your downfall. Amar lo zechorna mihu naki avad. He quotes in this pasuk from Eov, appropriate, right? Because we're comparing this whole thing to Eov. Who is naki gets destroyed. In other words, if someone doesn't have sins on them, they don't get destroyed. I'm good. I'm going. It's not going to bring my downfall. When the Satan realized he's not getting anywhere, Amarle, he finally throws the last bone to him. Elai davar yugunav. I have stolen words. Okay, what does that mean? This is what I heard behind the mechitza of God up in the heavens. He tells Avram, now here's the actual truth. He says, you're going to do the said, not Yitzchak. Okay, you're going to bring an animal and not Yitzchak. Okay, in the end, basically saying to him, don't bother even trying because in the end, they're not going to take Yitzchak. Amar lo. So what does Avram answer him? Kach on shoshal badai. This is the punishment of a liar. Shafilu amar emet ein shomim lo. Even when he tells the truth, people don't listen to him. Okay, and there it's like the boy who cried wolf. Okay, because he's always lying. So here he actually said words of truth, but Avram didn't accept it. Okay, and Avram gets through the trial, obviously, and as we know, the end of the story. Rabbi Levi Amal, he gives a whole different interpretation. It wasn't the Satan trying to get Abraham. It was actually between Yishmael and Yitzchak. Amal, and then again, putting Yitzchak at the center here. After the words of Yishmael to Yitzchak, Amar lo Yishmael Yitzchak, what also happened before? The circumcision. So, Ani gadol mimcha b'mitzvot. Yishmael said, I'm better than you in mitzvot. Atam alta ben shmona yamim, v'ani ben 13 shana. Right, your Brit Milah, you didn't even notice. You were 8 days old. For me, I was 13. I was much greater than you. Amar lo be'ever achadatam agarebi. What, you're tempting me because of one limb of your body? Ki im omer li akadosh baruch hu zevach atzmacha lefanai. If God tells me sacrifice yourself to Him, ani sofeach, I will do it. Miyad ve'elohim nisat Avraham. And then God tries Avram. Obviously, the problem with this thing, it should be ve'elohim nisat Yitzchak, right? But instead it says Avram. But the point is that's because the Akedah, sibling rivalry. Okay. Last thing for today, Tanu Rabbanan. We're going to get to a machloket that we've mentioned before, actually, to another Rabbi Shimon rabbi's machloket, which we've had a lot of in this Masechet. Navi shehidiach biskila. Rabbi Shimon omer b'chenek. If you have a navi who sways people to worship idols, he actually gets stoned. Rabbi Shimon says no, he gets chenek. Midichei ir anidachat biskila. If you sway a whole city to worship idols, also stoned. Rabbi Shimon says also chenek. So now we're going to learn where they get this from. Because the Mesi gets skila. So therefore, a Navi who tries to get people to worship idols should also get stoned. Same thing, because the word hadacha appears in both. Rabbi Shimon says, what do you mean? No, we're talking about the Navi Amidiach. Navi who tries to sway people to worship idols. There's a whole thing about it in the Torah. It says mita ktibebet. Okay, it says death. It says Hanavi chalem cholem. Okay, this is in Farim Yud Gimel. It says Yumat. Okay? Is it Yugimel, I think? Okay. So it says Yumat will be killed. What's mitastam? Mitastam is chenek. Okay? So we have this machloket. Do we learn it from the Gzera Sheva from there or not? So mita ktiva be v'chol mitam rabbi Torah stam en ala chenek. Midichei yer anidacha beskila, my time at Rabbanan. Gamrei hadacha hadacha omi mesid omi nebishetiach. Now, once you have the first one, right, you learn the mesid is skila. Obviously, we all have that. Then he already had the Gzera Shava for the Navi Shediach. So now the person who's Mediach, Irani Dachat, who gets a whole city, you're either going to learn from the Mesid or you're going to learn from the Navi Shediach. Either which way, it also uses the Lashon of Hadacha. And therefore, we're going to learn Gzera Shava from there to there. Rabbi Shimon says, no, Hadacha Hadacha mi Navi. He says, no, we're going to learn Hadacha Hadacha from the Navi. Because the Navi gets chenek. And therefore, there says Hadacha, there says Hadacha. So obviously, they're going to say, V'ligmar mi Mesid. Why don't we learn from Mesid? Danim mesit rabim, because the Navi tries to get a lot of people to worship idols, and the Medichei Yerani Dacha gets a lot of people. And the Mesit was just trying to get one person. So therefore, we're going to learn it from there. That's chenek. Ve'ein danim mesit rabim mi mesit yachid. Gemara says, Adrabah, danim hedyot mi hedyot. Ein danim hedyot mi Navi. The rabbis are going to say, what do you mean? No, you learn mesit from a mesit. In other words, an individual from an individual who, even if it's a lot of people or one person, but they're a regular person as opposed to a Navi. A Navi who's in a position of authority is going to have a different punishment. To which they say, Rabbi Shimon is going to answer, how can you call him a prophet? He was a prophet who tried to get people to worship idols. We can't say he has a higher status in society. He's not anybody. He's worse than a hedjot even. So we're going to learn him from, we're going to learn from a Navi to a regular person. Okay, so what did we do today? We finished up the Zakei Mamre Sugya about where we do the death and do we push it off or not push it off how do we publicize it basically. We got to the Navi Sheker. We had the 6 cases, 3 and 3 b'dei Adam, 3 b'dei Shamayim. We went through what the source for all of them is, each one pasuk to say all 3 and one pasuk to say the other 3. And then we had cases, examples of all of them. From that, we got off on this tangent about Avraham and the Akedah. And from there, we got back to our topic, and then we went to a different topic, which is other people who get chenek. And then again, only according to Rabbi Shimon, a Navi Shediach, and Medichei Yerani Dacha get chenek, whereas the rabbis think they get skila because they're more similar to a mesid. And then we went to the back and forth of what their proofs were. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day, Shavua Tov, and Purim Sameach to those who are still celebrating.